meaning like never go to the extreme, or like don't go super low fat, super high carb, or super high fat, super low carb for any extended length of time, because the body isn't designed to run like that. So over a period of time, you are going to stress your system by running it on a different system. And as I said, there's always other things that are in the background, whether it be, you're acidifying your blood because you've got too many, you don't have the right breakdown products because you're utilizing too much fat, or, you're having to use more oxygen. So, for example, to burn the fat, I think they said for 1 litre of oxygen, you actually get about 15% less energy from fat, from ATP created by fat than what you do from created by carbohydrate. So again, we talk about efficiency. You need therefore 15% more oxygen to get that same amount of energy. So as you're fitter, you probably won't notice it. But if you're not adapted to that, then you are going to be working harder to get that same amount of energy. But just coming back to the diets and the extremes, this is where, I know, like I followed a very extremely low-fat diet for a lot of years during my bodybuilding, probably under about 10%, which is like I was told that most people can't, palate a diet under 20%, and I found it very, very easy to do. Obviously, the things that you did suffer close to a competition would be, I guess the fat does play a role in lipid membranes, and I know I would get like very, very dry eyes. I probably didn't do my joints any favors, although I did always try to take some omega fats and essential fats to try to make up, at least if what fat I was getting was going to be a fat that my body actually needed. But in practice, I think that a good diet which isn't going to cause you kind of too much upset would be in that sort of 20 to 30% fat range. Now, me personally, 20% would be perfectly fine. And then, of course, that other 80% is going to be made up of carbohydrate and protein, and 40-40 of each, or even going up to 50% carbohydrate, 30% protein, depending on the type of activity that you're doing, would be kind of, to me, that's fairly balanced. I know I talk a fair bit about also the 40-30-30 zone diet, which is 40% carbohydrate, 30% protein, 30% fat. And this is something which, again, I believe is a very, very, very healthy diet. I did follow it 1 year for a competition, but then I realised that I actually hadn't quite followed it. I had probably followed more like a probably slightly higher protein, probably more like 40-40-20, because there was a little note that said that when you're counting up your protein and your fat, that if you're using protein powder, that you have to add extra fat in, because they had pre-calculated the fact that most flesh protein has fat with it. So I was actually taking less fat than I was supposed to on that particular diet, so hence a bit more protein. So again, when you're doing bodybuilding, and I know other sports is different, but bodybuilding in particular, we are not only looking at performance for what we're doing in the gym, but we are looking at an aesthetic. And that is what makes, I guess, to me, makes bodybuilding different to any other sport in the world, is that you're being judged on something totally different to what you do in the gym day in, day out. And it is all about maintaining the muscle, and how you get there is done through the training. So your diet is critical to be able to support your training, and still get that look, and you still have to drop body fat, and you still have to grow. You can do both, but it's a much slower process. But once you get into that last 10-week phase, you're more than likely just maintaining muscle mass and dropping body fat. The first part of the diet, you potentially can still continue to grow muscle, but the timing of the meals becomes ever so much more important, because you've got different types of training that you're doing, which is your cardio and also obviously your weight training. And you do have different things where you are trying to go for an aesthetic and get that body fat down. Now, with most other sports, obviously you want to have a healthy body composition, but you're not being judged on that, and you are being judged on your performance. So your actual, say, fitness for that sport is way more important, and the fuel that you eat, drives your competition or drives your training. But nobody's kind of judging whether you are holding water or whether you've got a little bit of extra body fat somewhere, which isn't really an issue for most things. So that's what makes bodybuilding, to me, so much more interesting and complex in terms of how you deal with your diet. And one other thing I'm going to say here, which is not really covered in research, because it's one of those things where I don't think really other than bodybuilders, probably nobody cares. But the role of carbohydrate in the texture of the muscle. So again, I talked before about glycogen being there to, give you that burst of energy when you need it. In bodybuilding, it gives you muscle size and muscle fullness and muscle hardness. So peaking's a whole other thing. I'll talk about that another time. But just during your training, if you're using glycogen to have peak, have good contractions, good strength, then that goes towards changing the texture of your muscle. But then if you essentially don't put that glycogen back in, which then means there's not the water back into the muscle, which doesn't give you that fullness, your muscle does tend to take on a softer look. And to me, that's the opposite of what you're trying to do for bodybuilding. So going like super low carb when you're trying to bodybuild, maybe, you go in and you feel like you're still having a great workout. But the one thing that I've learned is that you don't realize how much your energy dropped until you get your energy back. So you're going in the gym and you're struggling through, but you think that you're fine, and you haven't really realized that you're maybe resting 5 minutes between sets when you used to rest 3. Maybe your weights have dropped off a little bit, but even if they haven't, you're cheating a little bit more to get those up. But then at the end of the day, your muscle is not carrying that same hard texture that it does when you are following a higher carbohydrate diet. And I know this from practice. I know this from people around me who do it. So I believe that that is something which I can speak with fairly good authority, because I've been in this for over 30 years and seen people do it both ways. And the top professional guys to get that hardness and that look in their muscle, and they will go lower carb. But lower carb compared to off season does not mean zero carb. And what research is there about sports performance is that, again, moderate carb, you'll be okay, you'll get by on that, but zero carb is definitely it's almost like you're doing yourself no favor in sports performance. Those kind of things are for other types of health issues, but when it comes to sports performance, I can't really overstress the importance of carbohydrate. I can't overstress the importance of protein at the right level. Too much obviously then has the opposite effect, where again you're creating an inefficient system for your body, and protein does not give the same look. You're actually at a point, I noticed, and this is again anecdotal, over a certain percentage of protein in the diet, and for me that was a 45% absolute max that I could ever go, I would start to take on a very watery, very spongy look. And again, that was because it was compromising the carbohydrate. So there needs to be that balance, and just coming back to that, the perfect diet essentially. I still believe that something around that 20% fats, not really going up to more than about 30, and again off season you probably would bring that up to a little bit more around the 30, and then your carbs and your protein probably sitting around about that 40. Now I used to say that I had only about 30 to 35% protein in my diet, which I did when it came from the sources that I talked about, like lean chicken breast, tuna, protein powder. I never used to count any of the protein that I would get in from the grain sources, so I still would eat a lot of rice and oats. And they obviously have about, between, 14% protein. I think oats are a little bit higher, up around 20. And they do contribute protein to your diet, but I never used to count it. So when I went back and back calculated and said, okay, what was I really on if I count all of the protein? It would have been sitting around about 40. And now the reason why I say I am putting that in there is because if you look at your body, throughout a 24-hour period, and the way that it does extract things, store things, put things back out as it needs, I believe that in the intestine there is actually a balance of amino acids, and it kind of is there ready to marry it up. And as I said, as long as you're getting the complementary amino acids coming through, your body can take from those and utilize those throughout that 24-hour period, and build what it needs to build, so you're not as deficient. So that was always contributing towards my protein, but I did like to just count what was coming in from the chicken, the fish, the protein powder, and that sort of thing when I was counting that. So I was underestimating my protein and overestimating my carbohydrate. But that's why I say, when I look back now, in terms of having optimal strength for training, optimal protein for muscle recovery and muscle growth, then that was where I kind of found that balance. Now obviously if you're not trying to build a lot of muscle, then you would probably drop that protein down. bring that carbohydrate up or bring the fat up. Particularly looking at MCTs around specific event timing, and also playing around with the ratios and looking at the timing of it, because you might find that it suits you better to have it well spaced away from a race so that it doesn't cause any upset. But these are all things that I encourage everybody to go out and try. Write yourself a little system and just try what you think is a different kind of ratio. I will quickly say what I mean when I'm talking about percentage of protein. So percentage of my food coming from protein. I don't mean by weight. I mean, if I'm eating 2,000 calories in a day and I want to eat 20% of that as fat, that means that 400 calories, because that's, so 20% of 2,000, and I think I've got that right, 400 calories, would be coming from fat. And then I would divide that by 9, because there's 9 calories per gram of fat, and that will give me how many grams of fat to eat. So protein, 40%, that would be then 800 calories coming from protein, 4 calories per gram in protein. So 200 grams of protein, 200 grams of carbs, and then whatever it was, 600 divided, what did I say? 400 divided by 9, which is something like I'm going to have to get my calculator out for that, put myself on the spot now. But that's kind of where you're looking at for those ratios. So it's worked out on what percentage of the calories that I'm consuming are coming from either protein, fat, or carbohydrate. As I said, fibre I'm not really counting in there, because it does have a small contribution, and I will talk about that on another day. But I'm going to wind it up now. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you, Wayne. I love sharing this information, and I'm just going to give a bit of a shout out to Wayne. I think I probably saw him at one of his very first competitions. It was before I was competing. I think it was back in 1990, and I think it's just so awesome to see that Wayne, like myself, is still in the industry today, just always, it's just a phenomenal thing to see that you discovered the fitness lifestyle, and that it's just something that is in the blood, and it's very, very cool to see people that I've known for so many years watching. I don't know if he's watching or not, but I know that it's Roman's birthday today, so happy birthday, Roman, if you're watching. And just any questions, please pop them down the bottom below. I am sorry I jump around a little bit, because there's just so much, and I always go back and research and then just delve too deep in sometimes, and I have to try to pull it back a little bit. But everybody, thank you very much for watching. I am going to obviously have to do parts 2 and parts 3, and there's so much more to talk about. But anyway, I will speak to you all next time. As I said, comment, drop any questions below, because I'm happy to answer them in a shorter live, or any topics that you want me to talk about for these longer ones, just pop it in anyway. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday or Saturday, wherever you are.